And we are live. We are live.
Yay. Hey.
Thank you guys so much for joining us in today's live. We have the wonderful Jessica Ash Wellness on with us today to talk about our Dutch test hormone results, but then also just going to open the floor up for like female hormone questions, fertility questions, etc. So should we start? Let Jess give a little brief overview of who is Jess.
Yes, who is Jessica Ash Wellness?
Yeah. So I'm a nutritionist. I guess my fancy name would be like a functional nutritionist, a clinical nutritionist. I got super interested in hormones when I was a personal trainer, hardcore working out, and I had lost my period post-birth control, and I didn't even realize that was the source of my problems. I had all this gut inflammation, all these issues. I was gaining weight. I didn't even know not having a period was not a good thing. And then I started to realize, I started to hear about post-birth control syndrome, which was becoming more popular, and hormones, like this thing that I had no idea about anything. And I just started diving in. I was working with women at the time, lots of middle-aged women. And so they were coming to me. We were doing reducing calories. We were exercising, typical personal trainer. And it wasn't working. It wasn't working for me. It wasn't working for them. And so I was like, what's going on? And that really opened the world up to hormones. And I realized that, at that same time, I was getting diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome. I had 3 autoimmune diseases. And this whole kind of world of nutrition and health really was opened up to me. And then specializing in hormones just kind of became like it was a natural transition. I just really like hormones. I nerd out on them, and I love them in relationship to nutrition. And as I got, my cycle back, normalized my PMS, I went through paleo, keto, low carb. I was very into like the low carb keto community. And I just realized even though a lot of things had shifted for me and I was really focused on the weight loss, my hormones were jacked up. And so that's really what led me into the pro-metabolic community and more Ray Peat style mixed with primal. And here I am today. And I help a lot of women with PCOS and thyroid issues, but all types of hormone issues, really.
I think that we can certainly relate.
Yeah, we've been on a very similar journey.
Yeah, we have had over 10 plus years of heavy working out in the gym and kind of not really ever paying attention to the importance of female cycle and honestly even just building muscle, but more so just the importance of being a woman and having a normal period. It's just kind of not talked about enough. And so Sarah just got her period back.
Yeah, I haven't told YouTube yet. I finally got my period back. And it's funny because the results that we're about to analyze on my Dutch test, we gave them to Jess about a week ago, and she analyzed them and she's like, have you had your period yet? She could tell just by looking at my levels that I was about to ovulate and get my period. So it's going to be really fun to go over those results with you right now. So we're going to try to figure out how to screen share. Did you figure it out?
Well, first, I think we are certainly following a similar path now. We're kind of more Weston A. Price and pro-metabolic mixed together, Ray Peaty-ish. And I am still trying to get my period back. I did not get my period. Hopefully that comes soon. But Jess, was wonderful to look over our Dutch test results. Can you explain exactly what Dutch tests are?
Yeah, so it's a dried urine, comprehensive hormone test. That's what it stands for, Dutch. And that's really what it is. It's just a urine test that's testing for not just your hormones. So it's a really accurate representation. They say that's pretty accurate comparison to serum levels, which would be your blood levels of hormones. We have to remember that blood is just a highway for hormones. So oftentimes hormones are the way the cells communicate. Cells make hormones and receive hormones. That's how they communicate with one another. And so when you test urine metabolites, what you're looking at is how your liver is breaking down these hormones and into their individual components. So, how is your body processing or metabolizing these hormones? And so it's just another measure of hormones. I like it a little better than serum because it can tell you a lot more about what's going on inside the body rather than just your hormone is this level at this time. It's a nice picture of over the course of the day as well. So you still are kind of getting a snapshot in time, but at least it's a whole day rather than just one moment in time.
I did not know that. Cool.
Yeah, it's cool.
Okay.
I really like them. I think they're really good. I think they're way better than saliva test and way more accurate than a saliva test.
Well, on that note, somebody just asked, do you read them for clients too? So is this something that you can get a test done for somebody and then you can read it for them? Do you offer that service, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
we use this. I really use this as like a lot of people will like take it, and I'm not a doctor, so I don't take it and diagnose an issue and like be like, this is what you should do for this. What I'm looking for is I'm just looking for what's going on with the body and what can we do to support the body to get these things optimized. So I read it a little bit differently. I use it more as like a tool, but yeah, I absolutely do use these in my practice.
And we got our results back probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and Sarah and I just looked at the results and we're like, no, I do not know what any of this says. It's like gibberish. And then we jumped on the phone with Jess this past week, and she just made it super easy to understand. Yeah. So should we go over some of the results? Okay, who should we do first? Or I guess you can kind of talk about our similarities.
Can I see your screen?
Not yet.
Yeah. I would say like let's do Sarah's first. Sarah and Ashley both are, I mean, obviously you guys are sisters, so it's really interesting that you guys break down hormones very similarly. We'll see a lot of like similarities between the two. I would just say that Ashley's is a little bit more of an extreme version of Sarah's. So we'll go over Sarah's, and then we can compare it to Ashley's and just kind of like say what's going on.
People probably could have assumed that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So which screen should I share of Sarah's?
So let's do the Dutch cycle mapping, like that little 2-page one first. So just I can explain like the fluctuation.
Okay, let me add that. Where did it go? Add to stream.
Oh, cool.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a cycle mapping Dutch test. And this is like you guys probably paid for the extra cycle mapping, which is for people that don't have regular cycles. So usually when we show the other results, that's usually just what comes back on the Dutch test. And this cycle mapping kind of like test is what comes back if you're trying to kind of track your cycles and see, because for a normal Dutch test, you have to take it between day 19 to 21 of your cycle. But if you're not cycling regularly, you don't know what that is. And so that's why we take these these readings throughout the month. And so you'll see, like, according to these black lines, so that top section is estrogen, the bottom section is progesterone, metabolites. And the black lines are actually showing you like what the fluctuations of hormones should look like. So at the top, you're seeing that first rise of estrogen, and your level should be in between that. And so the blue is estrone and the red is estradiol. And so you'll see that you guys are both making more estrone, which is that tissue estrogen, and estradiol is kind of low, because that's what your ovaries are making. And that's how your ovaries really communicate with your brain. And if you're not cycling, then you're not going to be making a lot of estradiol, which is the goal. You want to be making estrogen in your ovaries. And so we'll just kind of look at this. Like Sarah's is, her estrogen is kind of starting to maybe fluctuate, but mostly the estrone, whereas the estrogen is still very low. And like I told you guys during our call last week, is it can take a little bit of time of cycling before you start to see those estradiol levels start to fluctuate, because that's when the brain and the ovaries start to communicate again after a long period of really not communicating, whether that's post-pill or if you have hypothalamic amenorrhea. And then at the bottom, you can see her progesterone metabolites. Like, of course, we're supposed to have that kind of like spike after we ovulate, which is where that black line's kind of showing you. Yeah. But it looks like she was starting to have some hormonal fluctuations. Like you can see that blue line is starting to fluctuate. It wasn't at the same time as they're like recommending, but that doesn't mean anything. It just shows that she was starting to maybe fluctuate, and those hormones were beginning to fluctuate. And so this is just kind of a good overview to understand, like, that's what the cycle should look like. And you guys, at least Sarah, was really starting to fluctuate. And then we can jump over to the actual Dutch test results now, so we can look at those.
So those black lines were kind of like, you should be in between those. In between those, yeah. That's like the high range and the low range. That's kind of the idea. Okay. Well, now I need to add it. Where did it go? You put that. I need to remove it. Add to stream. Nope.
Yeah, and then go to the other one.
Oh, technical difficulties.
We're trying to figure this out.
Wait,
that's at this.
Add to stream. That's not right.
Yeah, you got to find the other one. You didn't click it. There.
Nope, it doesn't work like that. Okay. Hang on 1 second. Stop screen. Share screen. There we go. Okay. So there we go.
The right one.
Okay. So which page on this one do you want me to show?
So we're going to do the first page first as a summary, and then third page.
First page first?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me go to share screen and there we go.
Perfect. Okay, so this is kind of like the summary of the Dutch test. And the Dutch test has multiple pages. As you guys said, it's like kind of looks like a foreign language, but really it's just showing the breakdown of all these different hormones. And so this is more of like the summary page and not necessarily going to tell you everything that's going on, but it gives you a good kind of like quick review that estrogen is low. Progesterone, this is a summary of her progesterone readings throughout the whole month. And so this would be like an optimal range of progesterone. So as an average of all the progesterone, there's actually a good amount of progesterone metabolites that were showing up on the test, and then a good amount of testosterone metabolites as well. So that, for having amenorrhea for so long, that's actually a pretty good reading. Normally hormones are pretty low.
And you were saying you think we have relatively high hormones for people with HA because we have muscle tissue on us. We have a good amount of muscle.
So it was like protective over the years.
Yeah, I would guess that it probably has a lot to do with maybe muscle tissue, as well as maybe not intentionally. It doesn't sound like you guys were intentionally under eating either. Like maybe you weren't eating enough especially of certain nutrients, but it doesn't sound like you were intentionally under eating.
Okay. Yeah. And so just to clarify to the audience, we want that arrow to be between the stars. So we want it to be in that green region.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. And that estrogen is still quite low, which of course is indicative that like you guys are still, the ovaries and the brain are still having a hard time connecting with one another. And then that bottom portion, the adrenal hormones portion, is kind of just showing you your circadian rhythm or your cortisol fluctuation throughout the day. And so we see you waking up with lots of stress because cortisol is really high. And then, it stays for Sarah in a fairly normal range for the rest of the day. Her 24-hour free cortisol is pretty high. Like it's creeping up towards to be outside of the range. It's higher, but it's not out of the range by any means. Metabolized cortisol is in between those quote unquote yellow stars. So that doesn't like stand out. And even your DHEA production, which is that kind of adrenal androgen or that precursor to estrogen and testosterone, is actually fairly good, which is interesting for somebody again with amenorrhea. So that's like a good overview. And then,
Wait, quick question. So this daily free cortisol pattern. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to point out that we want to be in the black lines again. So there's the high range limit and the low range limit. And when we announced on the story that we saw high cortisol in the morning, a lot of people thought that was normal. That's what it's supposed to be. But I think it's important to point out it's supposed to be low right when you wake up and then raise after. And
so
this
we were
morning
waking up extremely elevated.
Yeah.
Mine was even higher.
Yeah. So cortisol will rise, and that will be what kind of wakes you up. That's or part of what wakes you up. And so you do want a gentle rise, but you don't want it to be like shooting up, or you don't want to be waking up already stressed out. And then after you eat and after you go about your day, you want it to gently rise. So you'll see that peak. That's that 2 hour after waking reading. Yeah. And then after that, like 2 hours after you wake up, then after that, it will just gradually decrease over the course of the day. And that's kind of your natural circadian rhythm. But oftentimes with women, I mean, I see this all the time, is they're waking up with stress. Their body's already secreting stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline. They're already running off of they've already eaten up all their liver glycogen, and now they're just making their own sugar using their own tissue. So that's what's happening. A lot of times we're using muscle tissue to make sugar, and the way that we do that uses cortisol. Cortisol is the thing that breaks down muscle tissue.
And my cortisol was a little bit higher right in the morning, I think.
Yeah, very high.
Yeah.
Okay. What page should I go to now?
3. We'll go to page 3.
3.
I definitely want to talk about like nutritional strategies to improve upon the rising cortisol levels. I know we'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
Just putting it in that.
Okay. Yeah, I need to zoom out a little bit probably. There we go.
Perfect. Yeah, okay. So we'll start at the top. So you'll see that kind of gray section where it says pregnenolone. And pregnenolone is kind of what they would call the mother hormone, or that precursor hormone to all hormones. And we make pregnenolone out of cholesterol. Now, cholesterol requires vitamin A red light or sunlight and thyroid function to convert into pregnenolone. So we need that in order to actually convert cholesterol in. And this is why oftentimes people with hypothyroidism will have high cholesterol. And then
that's actually funny. Both of us,
oh my God,
our cholesterol is very high.
Yeah.
And so you brought that up in the phone call that maybe it's just because our body's not efficiently converting it into hormones.
Right. And that's usually with a lack of carbohydrates, you'll find that, or a lack of liver, because the liver is what's responsible for converting T4 into T3, and it requires sugar and amino acids to do so. Oftentimes, that's the puzzle piece that's missing. It's not necessarily like your thyroid's not working, it's that conversion is not happening, and so therefore you're like subclinically hypothyroid in some cases. So that's pretty common, especially with women who are on like low carb, keto, or just under eating. Or any type of like hypothalamic amenorrhea. It's often high with people who have PCOS. Like all types of hormonal conditions often come with high cholesterol. And a lot of times they'll just say like, don't eat dietary cholesterol. And it's like, it's so much more complicated than that. So you'll see like pregnenolone is going to turn into progesterone on that right-hand side. And then on the left-hand side, it's going to turn into DHEA. And then DHEA can be DHEA sulfated. And turn into DHEAS, or it's going to turn into androstenedione and then turn into testosterone. And androstenedione can actually break down into both two different metabolites. We have like 5A, which is androsterone, and then 5B, which is like, I always say this wrong, but it's like etiocalanolone. And depending on how your androgen or your testosterone metabolites are breaking down can kind of determine your symptoms. So they'll say that if you're breaking down testosterone into that 5A metabolite, you'll have more like androgenic type symptoms, whereas the 5B metabolite is a little bit less potent and is going to contribute to like your drive, your motivation, muscle tissue growth, etc. Yes. And then on the right-hand side, progesterone will break down into a 5A metabolite and a 5B. And I would just say, like, to simplify, 5A is going to just be a lot more of a potent form of progesterone than 5B. It's the thing that's responsible for, being anti-cortisol, anti-stress, helping you sleep. And so you want your progesterone breaking down to that 5A, which it seems like Sarah's it is. I mean, which is good.
It seems like they're both a little bit out of range. So what would cause me to not properly break down my progesterone?
Usually it's adrenaline, so it's stress, and that will also affect how we're responding to progesterone in the cell. So sometimes people will be like, I have great progesterone levels, I'm ovulating, I'm making progesterone, but I'm still feeling very anxious the second half of my cycle. Maybe they have really bad PMS symptoms, and that can be usually due to estrogen, which we'll go over, or just high stress, like adrenaline. Adrenaline can really affect how progesterone is uptook by the cell.
So would you say like anxiety would be a good indication that maybe you are metabolizing progesterone well? What are other symptoms of that?
Yeah, so I would say like very poor sleep during the luteal phase, which is after you ovulate. So maybe you'll fall asleep okay, but you'll wake throughout the night. Maybe you won't fall asleep well and you'll just have a hard time falling asleep, or maybe you're just not sleeping deeply. That's a big one. Hypoglycemia is actually a huge indicator of low progesterone. So progesterone helps us utilize sugar properly in a balanced fashion. And when we're progesterone deficient or estrogen dominant, we'll find that we're like having these really high highs where like our blood sugar spikes, and then all of a sudden we're like immediately hangry and moody, and our sugar is just like dropping up and down. So hypoglycemia can definitely be a sign. And then just regular PMS symptoms. So moodiness, breast tenderness, stuff like that can definitely be an indicator that we don't have enough progesterone in that second half of the cycle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those would be like my biggest indicators, but fertility is another big one, and thyroid function as well.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, testosterone can aromatize into estrogen, and estrogen can aromatize into testosterone. So they can kind of turn into each other. A lot of times that happens in both the liver and the gut. So that's something that a lot of people don't understand or realize. Oftentimes testosterone will aromatize into estrogen a lot more often than estrogen aromatizes into testosterone, but it's possible for it to actually go both ways. So that's something to remember. E1, like estrone, is going to be the estrogen that is made by the tissues. Estradiol, they'll say, is the most potent form of estrogen. And then E3 or estriol is a little bit weaker an estrogen, or they'll say. But A lot of estrogen. So you guys have talked a lot about how like the omega industry and polyunsaturated fat industry is driven by oftentimes like greed or biases. And this is very similar for the estrogen industry. And I find that this really permeates the functional medicine space as much as omegas do. So a lot of people will say estrogen is the female hormone, but this is actually propaganda that was spread right around the time that birth control came out. Whereas it has been known for years and years and years before that time that estrogen was actually given to cows to metabolically suppress them and to make them get fatter quicker. Like it actually made them insulin resistant. But after birth control came out, it was kind of one of those things where they had to do positive press around estrogen. And so there's been a lot of studies trying to prove the benefits of estrogen because of the birth control industry and because of the hormone replacement industry. And so I find that I don't agree with a lot of the information that's spread about estrogen any longer, even in the functional medicine space. There's only a select few people that I trust, one of them being Dr. Ray Peat. Like he talks about estrogen in a very different way. And he says that, you know, all estrogens are powerful. And if we're not making estrogen from the ovaries, which is estradiol, estrone can be just as potent. And that's the tissue estrogen or the estrogen that a lot of times the fat cells will create.
So is it a problem that I think both of ours look like this, that our estrone is in good levels? So again, our muscle tissues, we have a good amount of muscle that have the estrone. Is it a problem that our estradiol E2 is low, in the low range?
Yeah, we always want, you know, estrogen is an important hormone in context. It's not like just dangerous automatically. It's just, it's dangerous when we're not detoxifying it properly or we don't have enough progesterone to balance it out. I wouldn't say having a good amount of estrogen is a problem for women because that's what you need to thicken your uterine lining to prepare for a possible pregnancy, to grow breast tissue if you were pregnant. And it's what actually brings ovulation to fruition. So that's why we get an estrogen spike right before we ovulate. And then we get a secondary kind of lower estrogen spike middle of our luteal phase to kind of start thickening the uterine lining. So I would say that your guys' estrogen levels are going to be up and down just until you guys get your cycles back and have like a few good ovulations. That usually it takes some time to actually start to see like that gradual rise and fall and gradual rise and fall. But it seems like your tissues are making plenty of estrogen. It's just the ovaries that are not. So you'll see that, and estrone is normal, but estradiol is still quite low. And then estriol is also low. This is fairly common for HA, and it's kind of common for a lot of women. I would say it's technically like the estrogen that we make when we're, for example, pregnant. Like it's not as popular of an estrogen, but the body still should make some. And when you're not, that's usually just very common when you're not cycling regularly, not ovulating regularly like that. But what you really care about is how your estrogen is being broken down. So this is where it really matters because your body will eventually usually make estrogen if it has the raw materials to do so. But you want to look at both your phase 1 estrogen detox and your phase 2. So you'll see phase 1 is on the right-hand side. It's like that pie chart. And Dutch is really nice. They give you kind of these like expected percentages. So that green, they want that green piece of the pie chart to be between 60 to 80%. They want the red piece to be between 7.5 and 11%. And then that blue area to be between 13 and 30%. And that's kind of the breakdown that you want. Whereas we'll see that Sarah's is just is imbalanced. So her 4-OH pathway, or that red portion of the pie, that's what they would say is the most powerful or potentially dangerous metabolite. And this is very common with women who are on keto and low carb. There are even people that say that being in in the state of ketosis or not having enough carbohydrates actually pushes estrogen down this more damaging or dangerous pathway, the 4-OH pathway. And then you'll notice like there's 0% going down that 16-OH pathway. So this is just indicative that phase 1 of estrogen detox in the liver really does need to be supported for better estrogen breakdown in that first phase of liver detox.
Okay, so what are the dangers of that 4-OH being high?
Yeah, so you'll see, like, even on the Dutch test, it says if not detoxified, 4-OHE1 can bind to and damage DNA. And they'll say that this maybe could be a potential driver in things like maybe breast cancer. A lot of times this is what's responsible for like estrogen dominant symptoms. Women with higher amounts of these metabolites will have like more tender, sore breasts, maybe like worse PMS, maybe their periods are going to be a little heavier or crampier. They'll just have more intense estrogen symptoms. And that's because it's just a more powerful and potent metabolite. So you just, you want to keep it where it's meant to be. It's not necessarily bad, but any type of estrogen becomes bad if it's not detoxified properly and efficiently in the liver, which is common. And that's usually what the goal of what you're trying to work on. When you work on your hormones, it's let's get detoxification optimized. Because your phase 2, you'll see in the bottom left hand, that'll be like that methylation activity, and it'll kind of give you this little gauge of low and high. And it looks like phase 2 is really good. Phase 2 mostly relies upon amino acids like glutamine and glycine. All the amino acids really support phase 2, whereas phase 1 relies a lot upon antioxidants like vitamin E, vitamin C, minerals like magnesium are primarily responsible for phase 1. And we'll find that it's very popular in the functional medicine space to like use things like DIM or calcium diglucarate to speed up phase 1 metabolism. But I don't think that's like to try to just push estrogen through phase 1 without asking why is phase 1 sluggish, I think is kind of like a really not a great idea. Like we want to ask ourselves maybe why that's not happening or why phase 1's really sluggish. What are we missing? Because there's probably other systems in the body that are also being affected by those missing nutrients, not just estrogen detox.
Okay, is at the end of the digest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and we'll talk about all those nutrients at the end.
Or stay here.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So we're looking at all these hormones. So we went over progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen. But then we also want to remember that pregnenolone, that master hormone, turns into progesterone, which can also turn into cortisol and steal that progesterone. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. And that's where we'll go to page 5, and we'll kind of see what's happening with cortisol. So we saw that.
Is this page 5?
Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
So we have the hypothalamus and the pituitary, which are always talking to each other in the brain, and then they're talking to the adrenals, and the adrenals are going to pump out DHEA and cortisol. And then, we're going to metabolize cortisol or break it down. And oftentimes that's done mostly in the liver. And so that's why you're seeing metabolized cortisol. You're also seeing your total DHEA production, which we said is good. And then this little gauge, like at that right bottom corner, is showing you if your body prefers cortisone metabolites or cortisol metabolites. And for the sake of simplicity, we'll just call cortisone like a backup cortisol. Like the body can pull cortisone and turn it into cortisol at any time. This is why like synthetic cortisol, like hydrocortisone, is used as a anti-inflammatory agent, because cortisol is directly anti-inflammatory very quickly. The stress hormone is meant to be anti-inflammatory, so that if you were, let's say, running from an angry bear and you stepped on a thorn and broke your foot, you can't stop running. You got to keep going. And then you can crash later, and you definitely will crash later. It's just you got to keep going while you're running, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, we'll see here that you have a pretty equal breakdown. Your body doesn't prefer one way more than the other. You just have higher stress in the morning. And then, like we said, over the course of the day, it actually will fall. And I like to see that afternoon cortisol or cortisone to be kind of in the middle of the range, whereas it kind of seems like, you're waking up with stress, your body's being depleted. And then over the course of the day, that 2 hours after morning reading is actually kind of the body's a little bit tired there. Not that tired, but kind of tired. So lots of stress in the morning, and that could probably be just a carryover like we talked about in the evening, which we can talk about more in nutrient strategies. Yeah. So I would say the biggest thing that you want to kind of focus on is liver health, which we kind of keep saying comes up. And we have multiple indicators that maybe the liver is struggling, because we have phase 1 estrogen detox is a little poor. And then we've got lots of stress in the morning. And the liver is what is really responsible for keeping our blood sugar balanced while we sleep. And so when we look at these clues, and then we look at the clues that are offered to us on page 6, which is this last page of the Dutch test, I'm always looking, this has like a few nutritional organic acids and neurotransmitters, and these can be nice clues as to maybe a little bit more of what's going on. So you'll see that the vitamin B6 marker is at the high end of the range. Now it's not out of range, but it's at the high end, which can point to a vitamin B6 either deficiency or maybe a problem absorbing and utilizing B6.
And mine is similar, but mine shows B6 and B12.
Right.
So this shows that it's high in the urine, meaning that you're just not absorbing it in the body.
Yeah, it's at the high end of the range. So that can be an indicator of being deficient. If it's high, it's not always an indicator, but it can be. And I know that you guys are eating tons and tons of organ meats, tons and tons of grass-fed beef, tons and tons of bee bread, like all the B vitamins. So why are you deficient? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. It's not that, oh gosh, you're not getting enough. Are you using them up that quickly? Possibly. I mean, B vitamins are used in that phase 1 detox, but with how much you're eating, I would ask myself, why maybe aren't you absorbing or utilizing them as well as you can? And like we talked about, minerals are a big component of how you use B vitamins. So magnesium, potassium, sodium, very important. Vitamin C and vitamin E are also very important. And those, funny enough, are also important for phase 1 liver detox. So we're starting to draw together clues. Okay, we've got maybe a poor absorption of B6. We've also got maybe some poor liver detox in phase 1. And then we also have the marker of the glutathione marker being at the high end of the range. So again, not completely out of range, but maybe on its way. And glutathione, one of the main cofactors for making glutathione is vitamin C. And glutathione is made in the liver. So looking at all this, we have okay, we're starting to draw conclusions. Okay, it's pointing to maybe that phase 1 liver, what nutrients are missing to really support that liver so it can store sugar throughout the night, and so that you can make glutathione, you can absorb B vitamins better, and then you're going to further be able to detox estrogen a lot better, which is going to take stress off your body as a whole and possibly allow you to cycle a lot easier. And then the only other indicator of stress I'm seeing is possibly the dopamine metabolite. So that is above range. And I think oftentimes when dopamine is high, it's a protective mechanism against high serotonin. So of course we know that serotonin is not the happy hormone, like many people will say. And oftentimes the body will raise dopamine in order to kind of protect from high serotonin. Serotonin is going to be a neurotransmitter of stress. And unfortunately, the Dutch test doesn't test for that neurotransmitter, so we can't see it. But oftentimes, a high dopamine metabolite can be an indicator that, okay, maybe serotonin could also be high in the digestive tract, which is pretty common with estrogen being poorly detoxified in the gut.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So can we summarize the common minerals that you think are potentially a problem for Sarah and myself, and that you see that are potentially common for other women that have HA?
Yeah, so I would say really depending on your past, but we know that you guys have a past of some over exercise, maybe some undernourishment, and then anytime you're keto or low carb, what will happen is you guys are probably very well versed in the keto flu, where you kind of feel crappy the first week or two. And what's happening is you're actually peeing out all your minerals. So your adrenaline has now kicked in, your liver's robbed of all its glucose. Now your muscles have been robbed of all their glycogen, and now what's kicking in? Adrenaline is going to kick in and start making you sugar. It's breaking down your muscle tissue, and then you start peeing a lot. That's what happens. You're peeing, and you're peeing out all your magnesium, you're peeing out all your sodium, all your potassium, and that's why you lose a lot of water weight at first. People are like, ooh, I lost 10 pounds that first 3 weeks of keto. And I'm like, oh gosh, you peed out all your minerals. I feel bad, so it's very important to really focus in on magnesium, calcium. If you're not doing dairy, I mean, it's very difficult to get enough calcium from plant foods. And if you're not doing a high quality dairy, calcium is going to be definitely lost. And then sodium and potassium, those solvent minerals, so important for regulating blood pressure, and then also the adrenal glands, because the adrenal glands really take a hit when we're under eating and when we're low carb. And so we're just using up sodium and potassium and magnesium oftentimes faster than we can replete them or replace them. And this is called our burn rate, so our mineral burn rate. So Yeah, go ahead. Ask.
Oh, so what about, you can finish your thought, but then potentially talk about how women with HA may have a lot of iron as well, like iron overload.
Yeah, so I always look at, so we had talked about how vitamin C is probably an issue, vitamin E is possibly an issue as well, and then minerals. And what happens is when we're not bleeding regularly, so our bleed is very important. It's a way our body actually detoxifies and kind of turns on what we call our RES, or our iron recycling system. It's how our body actually gets rid of iron. We can only use about 24 to 25 milligrams of iron at a time. We recycle that, recycle that, recycle that. But women are actually very good at absorbing iron from their diet. So we only need about 2 milligrams a day, but oftentimes we're getting more. And then if we've been on the birth control pill, most pills will contain high amounts of iron. I've seen pills that contain up to 75 milligrams of iron per pill. Oh, and wow. So we know that if we're not using that, we can only use 24 to 25 milligrams at a time. Where's the rest of that iron going? If we don't have enough vitamin C or vitamin E to help us utilize that iron or get it out of the body, it's going to go into our tissues. I mean, our liver and our kidneys can store a little bit, but eventually, like, it just needs to go into the tissues. And iron encourages estrogen storage, and estrogen will encourage iron storage. So it's kind of this vicious cycle. And we need vitamin C and vitamin E and magnesium to be able to get that out of the tissues. So it's kind of this vicious cycle. We're not bleeding, so we're not recycling any iron. We're not getting any iron out. And then oftentimes women are taking a pill that contains more iron. So it's just further depleting us of vitamin E and vitamin C, and just like gets us farther and farther into that depletion.
Yeah. So to summarize what we are going to do based on your suggestions, more magnesium, more vitamin E, whole food vitamin C, and
then like sodium, potassium. Yeah, like coconut water powder for potassium, making sure you're really like replenishing with those minerals. What else did I, that's pretty much it. Like minerals, vitamin C and vitamin E for iron, and that first phase of estrogen detox. And then just really like focusing, like you guys are doing, on nourishing yourselves and being very conscious of the last time that you eat in the day. So are you eating close enough to bedtime to carry you through the night so that you don't start eating yourself, at 4 a.m. And we had talked about how you guys are sometimes waking up throughout the night to pee, and that can be a sign that there's an adrenaline response and we're peeing out minerals. And so we want to do anything we can to kind of calm that down. So sometimes just a bedtime snack's enough, but if it's not, then we actually have to sometimes eat when we wake up in the middle of the night just to get our body back into that.
This is actually a challenge that Jess has given me, because we both wake up quite a bit throughout the night. We're sleeping, I fall asleep easily. It's just, there must be some cortisol rise in the middle of the night, adrenaline. And so Jess wants us to just like eat something in the middle of the night when we wake up the first time. Like an orange juice or fruit or something, and then see if that kind of stops the rest. So I'm going to try it. I'm interested.
Yeah, it can be annoying. Like, it's definitely not like the funnest thing to do, but it also can really help us relax. And it's sometimes only needed for a period of time until our liver's a lot better at storing up glycogen or storing up glucose.
Okay, cool. Okay. Do you want to ask any more questions, or do we want to open it up?
I have a few more follow-up questions. So I had messaged you earlier this week about talking about acne, and so we've started all these protocols in terms of like making sure we're getting the minerals in, and obviously we're taking care of nutrients through our diet. And there's the whole, like, sometimes things get worse before they get better. And so I know I ovulated, so I had my period, but it seems like my acne I haven't had acne since I was like 14. And now I'm 10 years later and suddenly I'm getting pimples again. So could you talk about why that might be the case, of things getting worse before they get better, and then potential things that I could do, or if it's just seeing the course?
Yeah. So when we're in a metabolically suppressed state, which we should consider if we're low carb, keto, under eating, our body is going to try to conserve as much energy as possible and not expend as much energy on things like detoxification, eliminating toxins, things like that. Sometimes our body will actually just push it into the fat cells to deal with later because it doesn't want to expend that energy now. It's trying to just have you survive. It just wants you to survive. And so what can happen is we can think of like, okay, we're postponing. And then we're finally like, oh, we woke up and we're like, okay, now we got to give our body what it needs. And so as we go on this journey of nourishing our body, balancing out our body, as we start to make these hormones, progesterone, maybe our T4 to T3 conversion is better, so our thyroid function's better, we need progesterone and thyroid function to actually mobilize estrogen from the tissues. And I see this very often, even in women with HA who have their first Dutch test and they're showing up very low estrogen. And then they get their cycle back, they have a few cycles, their thyroid's being supported, their body heat's increasing, they're ovulating a couple of times. And it's just like a flood all of a sudden of estrogen. We'll just see like floods of estrogen. And that usually is like acne. Estrogen actually acts upon the oil glands of the skin, so it can increase sebum production. And I know you guys are going to interview Ray P. I would really encourage you to ask him about it because he knows way more than I do. And I think it's so interesting when he talks about it. But he talks about how estrogen will increase like oil producing glands or have an impact on the oil producing glands. And then we have to think that iron, if it's not able to come out of the digestive tract fast enough, it can actually come out through the skin. Heavy metals will come out through the skin when they can. And so iron feeds pathogens. Iron feeds bacteria. So we have oil producing glands being affected, and then we have iron coming out of the tissues, and it's a perfect bacterial storm. And so we start to get these deep cysts if we're not detoxifying well. And so that's why like you really want to be supporting phase 1 detox and phase 2 detox. The better they are supported, the easier it is on your skin. And you can always back off. You know, magnesium helps with detoxing iron, vitamin C helps with detoxing iron, and sometimes we just go too fast, too hard, or we take too much vitamin E and it's just too much. And so it burdens the kidneys, it burdens the liver. And so the skin is another major detox organ. And so the body will be like, well, we're coming out through the skin. And so you'll find your BO is also maybe getting worse, like body odor is just like, wow, that's so gross, you know, and that's actually sometimes a good sign. It's like, wow, like I never knew. There's some people that are like, I never stank in my life until I started moving estrogen and iron. It's just like I have the worst BO. And that's usually a sign like it's just moving, it's mobilizing. And this it can go for like really, I call them detox periods. You can have a few good cycles where you start ovulating again, you start getting your period back. You're like, ooh, like I got my period back. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I got my period back. Where it's like they're heavier cycles, maybe a little bit clotty, maybe just weird. Like you're like, wow, my breasts are really sore. Just maybe more like extreme symptoms than you've experienced. And usually it's a couple cycles. So I would say like on average it lasts like 90 days or maybe 3 cycles where it just gets worse before it gets better. Okay. And if it doesn't get better, then you're like, you want to start questioning, okay, what am I doing that's maybe either too hard of a push, or am I just doing something that's not working for my body? And that could be a possibility as well. I like Shilajit. It kind of helps gently bind to iron. It's all the trace minerals. So it's like every trace mineral.
We are getting some in the mail. From Vital Life. Yeah. Shilajit. What is Shilajit?
Shilajit is like I guess we could call it like a fulvic substance. It's plant matter and animal matter. Oftentimes they find it like deep in between like rocks and things like that and high elevation mountains. But usually it's just like plant matter, like animals have died, plants have died, and it's gotten deep into the soil. And so it's a very mineral rich. It's every trace mineral, every mineral, and it has this kind of gentle detox effect. So it does actually pull heavy metals from the cells and things like that. And people see a lot of benefit with their acne because it helps gently bind to iron.
Okay. Yeah. Well, cool.
Yeah, I like it. And I like it. It gives you at least it gives me a lot of energy.
I'm excited. to try it.
Yeah.
Okay, should we open it up to questions?
Yes, I think we've gotten some questions here. While you're looking through, find some.
Okay.
I wrote down some questions from like our community forum, and somebody asks, what can they do about bad PMS symptoms?
Yeah, so usually PMS is because of I always say like your period is your monthly report card as to how your health is doing. So,
I have failed for so long.
You're like, I don't even have, my report card hasn't even come in a while.
No.
So that's just like kind of how you want to treat it. Is if your period's really rough, it usually means your body's not feeling supported all cycle long. And we want to kind of start with like the simple things. So we want to know if we're ovulating or not, because the only way that we make progesterone is by ovulating. And if we're not ovulating and we're not making progesterone, then we don't have that hormone that's going to balance out estrogen. So that's always the first step if we're experiencing like really rough luteal phases or really rough periods. Like we want to make sure we're making progesterone. And then if we're ovulating, we're making progesterone, then we would want to focus on maybe why estrogen is not detoxifying well. And like we kind of talked about during this talk is like, it takes nutrients to detoxify well. It takes carbs and protein. Your liver needs both. You also need vitamin E, vitamin C, magnesium, sodium, potassium, even iodine, selenium. So just a mineral and nutrient-rich diet is very important for protecting PMS. And then we have to keep stress hormones down. This is why oftentimes we'll get really bad periods if we're not eating enough or we're not eating frequently enough. Eventually that kind of catches up with us because it impacts the way that we're detoxing estrogen. And estrogen is usually that driving factor when it comes to PMS.
Okay. So would you say that this is pretty accurate? To balance the mood?
Yeah, like ideally if your hormones are balanced, the mood is also balanced. PMS is not healthy. Menstruating should be asymptomatic other than the bleed. Yeah, I would say like menstruating should be maybe as asymptomatic as possible. Some people, I do think the body is going into an active depletion when you're menstruating. So you shouldn't be going ham at the gym the same as the rest of your cycle. You actually are in an active depletion. You might feel a little bit more like withdrawn or tired during that time naturally, but it shouldn't be like an exhaustion or like you're turning into a different version of yourself. Like that's not normal.
Okay.
Okay, we've got another.
Well, related to different phases of your cycle,
We should do a completely other.
We can do a whole talk on that if you want.
Like we want to learn and dive into more like how you should structure your nutrition, your weight training.
I ask.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do a separate video on that then.
Okay.
Okay, let's get through some questions. So here's another one. Does high cortisol before waking cause you to wake up too early?
Yeah, I mean, usually cortisol or adrenaline is the hormone that's responsible for waking you up. Like if you wake up at 2 a.m., oftentimes our liver will run out of sugar. Like I would say for most people, it's around 2 a.m. Some people it's midnight. Some people it's like 4 a.m. But yeah, that's when our body starts to kick in and make its own sugar. We should think of stress hormones like cortisol or adrenaline as making its own sugar. And I know like a lot of your followers are in the keto community, so it's oftentimes thrown around like gluconeogenesis. Like you don't need to eat glucose, your body makes glucose. And I'm like, yeah, it makes glucose using you. You're literally eating yourself to make glucose and you're depleting your liver in the process. It's a very inflammatory process. It's a backup system. It's not a primary, like our cells don't like to run off of that. It's only if necessary.
So question here though, I have heard multiple people who are on keto who do sleep throughout the night. Is their liver just better at storing glycogen?
They might be in true ketosis. Like I do think there are people that don't ever really fall into ketosis very well. And then there are people that are truly burning fat for fuel. They've become, remember, ketosis requires insulin resistance. So your cell has to be able to reject sugar in order to run on fat. That's a backup system. It's not what the cells prefer. It doesn't create as much like carbon dioxide. It's horrible for the mitochondria, but it is a possibility. You know, think about if we were going through a winter, a famine, and all we had to run on was like animal food and animal fats. Like we could survive, right? Doesn't mean we're gonna thrive.
I know that's going to be a very unpopular opinion in our community.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we're going to get Morley Robbins. We're going to try to get him on our YouTube channel as well. He agrees with you and Ray Pete and like this community on many things, but he doesn't agree on he thinks humans should be fat fueled.
Yes.
So I'm very curious to hear his counter argument as well.
I'm interested too because, you know, he always talks about copper. That's like his big thing, magnesium, and like the main enzyme that helps with copper regulation requires thyroid function. And thyroid function requires carbohydrate. So it's just really interesting to me because like everyone has their different like, oh, well, minerals run the show. And I'm like, well, yeah, but the thyroid runs enzymes. So, you know, it's just very interesting to me like when I hear people's perspective on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Should we move to the next question? Yeah. Okay. This is interesting. So when I started eating more regularly, I found my hunger increased a lot. What does this mean? And did this happen to you?
Yeah, I mean, appetite is kind of like we can use it as like, it's like our engine fuel light. Like we need fuel now. And a lot of times when you're not eating enough, you're going to see your appetite decrease because cortisol and adrenaline are appetite suppressants. Mm-hmm. They suppress your appetite. Say you're trying to survive in a famine. Food is scarce. You don't want to constantly be hungry, right? So your body's just going to silently and quickly switch over to eating you instead. And so if your body's so used to eating yourself to make sugar, eventually your appetite just kind of goes away. You know, your body only tells you what it needs for so long, and then it starts to tell you in other ways, by losing hair, or maybe seeing your skin break out, or maybe your period gets lost. You know, appetite is our first sign that if we lose it, that's our first sign something's very wrong, because we want that indicator that we're using fuel while our body's asking for fuel. So we can think about it like, let's say you were hiking through the Sahara Desert and you lost water, you're deficient in water. The minute that you have access to water, you're just going to gorge yourself, right? You're so thirsty, you're just going to gorge yourself until you're full of water. It's very similar to food, and I see this very commonly with women. They cannot stop eating until their body feels nourished, and it can sometimes take months. They can literally, they'll just eat and eat and eat and eat because their appetite is so messed up. Their hunger hormones, they're so messed up, like leptin and ghrelin, that they've got to get to a point where their body can finally communicate to them again. And it can sometimes take some time. It's kind of like a byproduct of just being restricted for too long.
Yeah, if anyone else is interested in this kind of topic, you should definitely check out Stephanie Butterworth's All In series, where she went many months just not restricting food at all. And this was after her doing a bikini competition and being really lean. I would say that Sarah and I's journey right now is not as extreme as hers. It's a modified version where I lost touch of my hunger signals so many years ago.
Well, we went through keto and fasting, and we kind of were led to believe that it's not good to be hungry. It's almost a good thing to not feel hungry. And so we didn't pay any attention to the fact that we were literally never hungry and that we could fast for hours.
So, okay, I have one counter there. I think that if someone is overweight and is trying to lose weight, couldn't that be beneficial though?
What we have to understand about someone who's overweight, we have a body that's pushing fuel into the fat cells and not utilizing that fuel properly. And so a lot of times cells are actually starving, whereas fat cells are full. And so if we fast for long periods of time, we're actually going to rapidly pull from the fat stores. That means iron, estrogen, polyunsaturated fats are rapidly coming out of the tissues. You don't necessarily want that. So I think someone that's overweight is a much better candidate for maybe a lower fat, moderate carb and protein diet that makes sure they're getting all their nutrients and keeping their blood sugar balanced just like anyone else. Just a little bit of a calorie deficit is better than being fasting and gorging. This is why oftentimes you'll see people that lose a ton of weight and they look like they've aged 10 to 15 years. They have lipofuscin all over their face. So those age spots, liver spots, it's because their body didn't have the liver capacity to deal with all of the polyunsaturated fats or the iron coming out of their tissues that rapidly.
You said you had a follow-up? Yeah. So we came to this journey being, we weren't underweight for our height, but we have been under eating for a really long time.
Yeah, we talk about this we've always been into exercising a lot, and so we've always expended a lot of energy. We've never intentionally really underate, but we've always eaten just lower than what we should have, and so we're always in a slight deficit.
Maybe, I don't know. It's confusing, but somebody DM'd us asking. Okay, so yesterday we were talking about in the story the things that I did to get my period back, and two of them were stop fasting and eat in a caloric surplus. And so somebody DM'd us asking if somebody's overweight, should they do that as well?
Should they be in a caloric surplus?
Yes, and not fast at all to get their period back. And I thought it was an interesting question because I have been 110 pounds before, and I've been 170, and even at my heaviest, I didn't bleed. So I wanted to get your take on how much does body fat play a role into all this? And then do you need to eat in a caloric surplus if you are suffering from amenorrhea?
Yeah, so I think it's more than just calories. There's a lot of people that go to the doctor and they're underweight and they don't have their period, and their doctor will say, just gain some weight. And so they'll just go crazy and they just start, everyone thinks gaining weight just means eating Oreos and stuff like that. But it's more about it's a metabolic issue as much as it is, it is a reproductive issue. The reproductive system and the metabolism are intimately connected. And so we kind of can see that with people who are underweight or overweight. can both lose their periods, right? It has nothing to do with body fat percentage, and it has everything to do with health as a whole. Like, how stressed out does the body feel? And many women who are overweight, their body's just as stressed as someone who's underweight. They just have a different reaction. So, you know, their body's pushing fuel into the fat stores for later and using the least amount as possible, whereas someone who's underweight is just burning through those calories so rapidly they can't put anything into storage. Similar situations, their body's just handling it different. This is very common with women who have polycystic ovarian syndrome. Oftentimes they're considered obese. Now, our society tends to just view body fat as automatically bad. But there's a lot of, this is a good question for Ray Pete as well. I've seen him mention that there's some evidence that shows that menstruating women might do better hormonally at like 25 to 30% body fat. That means like a lot of people would look at 25 to 30% body fat and think like, oh, that's overweight. That's overweight for me. But it's actually like, that seems to be where people thrive. And I've seen this in my work. You know, I've worked with hundreds of women, and most of them will gain 20 or 30 pounds before they see their hormones balance. And then they get to a point where they want to lose the weight. They start losing the weight. And I say, like, the minute the hormones stop synchronizing and being good is where your healthy weight is. And oftentimes it's about 15 to 20 pounds heavier than they're comfortable with. They're like, oh my God, I can never be lean. And I'm like, well, it's not culturally appropriate, but it's biological.
Sad because the bodies that are idolized on like Instagram and stuff are typically extremely lean, and they're like health and fitness accounts, but you never really understand whether they're menstruating or do they feel good. They just like look good. And so everybody assumes that that's what's healthy. And I think that we kind of had that mindset for the last 10 years. I don't know if we actually believed it. We just like thought that was what was attractive.
Yeah.
And then being on the other side of that, realizing like it's actually attractive to feel good and to menstruate and to be able to like think straight. It's sad that our society idolizes that body because it's really unachievable, and you have to sacrifice so much to stay that lean all the time.
Oh yeah. Like, I just see it as a sacrifice. And oftentimes I'm seeing women, you know, I used to think the same thing. Like, I used to be very lean, very fit, could see my abs. And now all I see, like when I see someone's abs, is like I see their hip bones, I see their rib bones, I see that their hair is often thin. I see that they've lost that layer. There's a layer of skin that women, or fat that women should have between their muscle and their skin. It's what gives you kind of that plump and youthful look. It's like what women use like fillers for. They're trying to like chase that look. You know, they want to be like lean, but then they also want to have a plump, like youthful face. And that's what I see. It's very common, like the keto and low carb community, you know, where it's idolized to be very lean, but they've lost that like youthful. They've got sharp cheekbones, sharp ribs, sharp hips. That's starvation. You know, like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that would have been considered starvation.
But even that's like even in like bodybuilding as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Just kind of, it seems like across the entire spectrum, like even in the vegan community, like just being thin is just idolized.
Yeah, it's like waifish, like you want to be like a waif, you know? And it's because of what was kind of happening. And it's cultural for sure. You can kind of I've looked at the timeline of what was idolized since the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s. And you can watch as models became thinner and thinner. Our actual national body average, our body weight average actually got bigger and bigger. So women naturally stayed at like a healthy 25% body fat naturally with the diet of, let's say, 100 years ago. But then as like we saw, you know, Marilyn Monroe was considered very curvy, which that's actually like that would be like almost like a natural woman's body type. And then over the course of years, we had like up until the 90s, it was getting thinner and thinner and thinner until models were like that cocaine chic, where it was like women were stepping on the runway at like 100 pounds, you know, and it became like very popular to see your hip bones be a size 0. And as that continued on, it's just been like now it's permeated that is health. You know, being skinny is healthy. Nothing about a period. Like these people don't have periods. You know, I pretty much now know, like when I'm looking at someone whose hip bones are jutting, you know, eventually they're going to come out on YouTube and be like, I haven't had my period in 2 years. And I'm like, yeah, I know.
Yes. Yeah. People looked at us and probably said, those girls probably struggling with their period. So just to return back to Michelle's question, I would say, yes, Michelle, when I started to eat more regularly, my hunger started to increase. But my question back to you is, why is that a bad thing? And is your body trying to say something?
Right. Hunger is not bad. Hunger is actually good. And that's where we have to kind of shift the mindset.
Okay, let's find what time do you need to log off? Because it's been an hour.
I'm free.
Okay, we'll do a few more questions and then we will have to get you back on because I really want to talk about like the period spectrum.
Yeah.
Okay, should we go here?
Yeah, we kind of addressed this, but
just to clarify.
Oh, yeah. So there, B6 and B12 have mineral and vitamin cofactors, and vitamin C and vitamin E, as well as magnesium, sodium, and potassium, or a mixture of those, are all cofactors to B vitamin absorption. So B vitamins are kind of like, we can call them the metabolic vitamins. They're very important for metabolism, cellular use of glucose, but oftentimes they are very intertwined with minerals and vitamin C. So everything we talked about was so that, those were maybe indicators that there were some deficiencies there or some needs there.
Okay, cool. Okay, so this, I really like this question because Jess enlightened us on a way that we should be having our magnesium. So go ahead, you can talk.
So like sodium, there's no such thing as like a sodium supplement. So there are a lot of mineral salts in things like, fruit juices and vegetable juices, but, just good old sea salt is a great source of sodium. And then for magnesium, I really like bicarbonate. I also like magnesium chloride on the skin. Like that's a great way, or, soaking in an Epsom salt or magnesium flake bath. And then, if you can't get enough using bicarbonate and chloride, then I like magnesium glycinate personally. But malate and threonate also are good forms.
Can you talk about how you make your magnesium bicarbonate?
Yeah. I just use milk of magnesia and CO2 water. So any kind of carbonated water, you got to make sure it's cold. And then you add about 3 tablespoons of milk of magnesia into like a liter of carbonated water. And then you just shake it up. You let it kind of settle in the fridge, and then you take it out, you shake it up one more time, and then you let it kind of settle. And then if you need to shake it one more time, there's any sediment at the bottom, you just shake it again. But the CO2 and the magnesium, I think it's like hydrochloride, will react to make bicarbonate.
Cool.
So this next question has to do with nutrition. So can we answer this and then just briefly go over like pro-metabolic foods and foods to nourish the menstrual cycle?
Yeah, so, any type of green or plant food always has the potential to kind of like cause more of an immune system reaction. We always have to remember plants are just as intelligent. And so they have their own defense mechanisms against being eaten. They don't like to be eaten as well. And animals that do eat high amounts of plant foods have systems that actually help them break that down, like cows. So when we go to eat plant foods, it's very relative to the person. Some people do fine on a good amount and some people do horrible. I'm someone that does horrible, and it just makes me cringe because I ate like kale salads for years. But I would say that pro-metabolic foods are going to be easy to digest and easy to absorb as energy, things that aren't going to slow down the digestive tract or maybe be more energy than they're worth. So for example, if you have a bunch of bulk, that takes a lot of energy to break it down, and it doesn't provide a lot of energy in return for you. It's just a good way to think about it. So, when we look at like pro-metabolic plant foods, it's going to be roots and fruits, squashes, things like that, because they have a good amount of carbohydrate or energy that's going to provide us with some type of energy in return.
We used to be huge volume eaters. Yeah. We would grab those like shredded lettuce bags from the grocery store and have like 5 in one sitting. And be like Kobayashi style, like how much food can I fit in my stomach, expand my stomach, and we were getting so few calories out of that,
so few nutrients. Our calories we were always tracking macros, so our calories were consistent, but we were never getting enough nutrients. This was before keto and carnivore, guys.
And then obviously, in addition to that, like animal foods, animal meat, dairy are going to be very high in nutrients.
Yeah. And I will add a preface, like I do think plant foods actually have their place. I think there's a lot of demonization of like things like greens in the pro-metabolic community. And it's really just based on your digestive capacity. Like you don't want to necessarily rely on them for nutrients, but they can still have some positive like gut benefits. And also some people actually like do fine on cellulose fiber to kind of keep similar to like the raw carrot, like it can help keep things moving for some people. And then like greens broths do have a place. Cooked greens ones, like really well cooked in like lard. I mean, I make sure to do them like maybe once or twice a week to make sure that I'm getting like the calcium and the minerals. And that actually does benefit me on a gut level. And it's just a way to get some extra calcium in and some other like beneficial minerals. So they do have their place. I would say if you have a poor time digesting them, like mineral broth or vegetable broths are probably the best way to get their minerals without having to digest their fiber.
So I know that I don't do well with green things. Like I tried reintroducing them and it just doesn't work well in my stomach. And so I think it just goes to show like everyone is different and you have to experiment what works best in your tummy.
Yeah. And I know like post keto, because I had killed off all like the bacteria that digest plant food, I could not digest like greens or vegetables for probably like a year and a half. And then like eventually I could like do maybe like a couple of bites and then like so on. I just want to, I try to keep as much freedom surrounding food. Like you don't want to be like, oh my God, I'm like 8 months pregnant bloat from anything that you get exposed to. So it's always good to keep your like digestibility as good as possible. But it's definitely like a lot of people need to do low vegetable for healing.
Okay, just one more point that I think it's important to always consider that we talked about this on our post today from Instagram that like the soil health is pretty bad right now. And so relying on fruits or relying on like plants for your nutrients is probably not the best idea because the soil is so depleted. And so the food that's grown in that soil is going to have less nutrients. And so I think just always important to remind people that we still are all advocates of like animal protein or animal nutrients is going to be the best and most bioavailable.
Yeah. Animal nutrients are where we should get our nutrients from, and plants are kind of like a condiment for maybe anything that's missing. That's how I treat it.
Yeah, I like it. Okay.
All right. Question about losing minerals.
Okay. Let's do 5 more minutes. We don't take up too much of your time. So we'll go for an hour and 10 minutes and then we'll make sure to have Jess back on. So all right. Yeah. Hey guys, why does stress cause the body to lose minerals? I ask because I don't understand why the body would release useful minerals.
Yeah. Hey Zainab, it's good to see you. She's like she's a regular in my lives. So that adrenaline is a diuretic. So diuretics cause us to lose water. It's just a stress response. So, when we are, any type of hormone in high amounts can act like a diuretic, but specifically adrenaline is going to do that. And that's kind of just a side effect of having high adrenaline. It's going to cause us to lose hydration because it kind of shrinks our tissues. That's what we have to kind of think of it. The more stress, the less energy we have to expend. And so tissues shrink, right? Hydration leaves. That's why we're peeing it. That's why, like, I don't know, we can use bodybuilding competitions as kind of a like example. You know how they'll like deplete themselves of water the week leading up so that they look really like lean and really like small and shriveled up and shrunk. That's kind of what's happening is like your body's shriveling up, tissues are shriveling up, so there's the least amount of tissues to support.
Okay. Anything for low thyroid?
Anything for low thyroid. I mean, everything that we kind of talked about, like liver, the liver is the kind of core metabolic organ. So that's where the most conversion of inactive thyroid hormone T4 is going to be converted into T3. Majority of it's going to happen in the liver, a little in the gut, but mostly in the liver. So, we need a good amount of carbs and protein to be able to convert.
No.
Are you sure?
Okay. No.
Okay.
Okay. This is.
Oh, we're breaking up here. Do you see it? Oh, there we go. Tips for feeling good through initial weight gain.
We didn't talk about mentalities, so we'll just shift there for a second. We can talk about this one too.
Yeah. So I would say shifting your whole idea of what your body is for. Like the female biology is literally all consumed with reproduction. And even if that's not your personal purpose, that's what your biological purpose is. And so every single cell is fighting for that. That is like to carry on the human race. And so when we don't have safety, our body does not feel safe to reproduce. And so fat is simply stored fuel for later. That's what the fat cells are. They're kind of storage tanks. They're storage tanks for glucose, free fatty acids. And all we have to see is body fat is not automatically bad. but be careful who you're following, who is making you feel like body fat is automatically bad. Because oftentimes our idea of body fat is coming from whoever we're following on Instagram or YouTube. They're talking about how lean they are, and they're talking about how that, you know, how restrictive they're being and how that's a positive thing, you know, how not hungry they are. And so that can really shift how we're thinking about our own body and our own skin. So I would say be like, kind of challenge how you view body fat. Are you seeing it as what it is, which is just safety? The body is storing fuel for later, or are you just seeing it as an automatically bad thing? And then also, I know this is very common, but like we oftentimes have body dysmorphia. So we see ourselves as like, I'm always fat, I'm always overweight, when in reality we're not. And we're probably actually underweight oftentimes. So, you know, just shifting your view of what you deem healthy. I think health is having a period, being able to sleep well, get through my day, be able to think, have mental clarity, be able to do all the things I need to do. I no longer think health is just seeing my abs. But if you think that, then you're going to continue to not value your health in that way. So it's more of a mindset shift than anything else.
I think also what helps me is honoring what your body can do, not what it looks like.
Yeah.
And I think that having a body that's like menstruating, like that's beautiful. Like that's so beautiful. You're so beautiful.
I'm feeling so beautiful about
I'll get there one day. Hopefully.
You will.
We'll see. Okay.
And also just, it's a journey, Tamison. Like Ashley and I have bad days a lot, but we have a really great support system, and people like following Jess has been huge for us to realize like, it's not a bad thing to have body fat. Like you need it as a female. I always talk about wanting to be a mom one day, and like my body a year ago. That's funny. Sarah.
Stepping off that bikini stage. Okay.
So we're in with you on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we are going to end the live here. But before we go, Jess, where can people find you, and what are you looking forward to? You can like talk about like your Nourish. Yeah.
Course. Yeah, you guys can follow me at Jessica Ash Wellness. I'm mostly active on Instagram. I do have a website, jessicaashwellness.com, which is kind of just like an echo chamber for what I talk about on Instagram. We're in the works of actually working on a YouTube channel, so that's coming soon. But right now I'm working on my online course, Fully Nourished, which is pretty much just talking about everything that we talked about today. It teaches you about your menstrual cycles. It teaches you about your thyroid hormone, your metabolic function, and then how to master that using food frequency, carbs, proteins, fats, understanding starches, fructose. It's pretty much just the metabolic blueprint. I also dive into, you know, how to transition from keto into eating carbohydrates again, how to kind of get your body used to that. And then like the functional foods as well, you know, orange juice, why orange juice is important, why oysters are important, liver is important, dairy is important. We talk about all the functional foods as well. So it's really just that metabolic blueprint.
I love that it's called Fully Nourished because
I feel well nourished.
You like being a female, you need to be fully nourished rather than like just this focus on being lean and small. So I just love that it's called Fully Nourished. But
that was one of the things that we, instead of calling ourselves like chubby that day, we'd be like, man, I feel nourished.
Yeah.
I feel like full and like a good like version of myself. Like I'm in my own skin. Yeah, that's like the goal.
I love it. Okay, we'll have to have you come back on. Enjoyed this discussion. Hope you guys did and learned some
write down
things.
the questions that we got that we didn't get to address,
and we'll get to those next time. But
thank you guys so much for having me.
Jess, so every time we end our YouTube,
there we go.
We say behave like a angel.
Very important.
So we have to say it together.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Behave like a angel.
There
you go.
That's so cute.
Okay, bye guys.
Bye.